Lightning Bolt. It's the iconic Magic the Gathering card. When you imagine the heated duels of Master Mages, it's one of the first cards that comes to mind. It's also one of the most efficient and versatile removal spells ever printed. Whether you're in a straight-up burn deck in Legacy or Modern, or just a deck playing red that wants some removal, Lightning Bolt is the marquee burn spell and a format staple. Today we'll be brainstorming about Lightning Bolt. What makes it good? Does anything come close? How should you play against it? We'll learn all this and more. We're not newbies anymore, but we're not yet ready to rival the MPL. This series is for those who already play at Friday Night Magic, already know how to play this game, but want to get better, to improve upon their skills. This is for the intermediate, and this is Tolarian Tutor. So let's look at Lightning Bolt. It's honestly pretty simple. Lightning Bolt says deal 3 damage to any target. Yep, that's it. A lot of what's attractive about the card is that it's so simple to understand. In the last episode, we covered mana dorks, and we discussed the old adage of bolting the bird. Well, Lightning Bolt does more than bolt the bird. It can remove a creature that's attacking you, ensure trade between your blocker and a bigger creature, remove a creature that would be blocking your creature, ensure trade between your attacker and a bigger blocking creature, remove loyalty from a planeswalker, kill a planeswalker, deal damage directly to a player, kill a player. Lightning Bolt is reactive and proactive. In the same way as creatures are good because they can do multiple things, have an enter the battlefield effect, attack, and block, Lightning Bolt is similarly flexible. Where cards like Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile give the opponent a resource for their trouble, life or a land, or, in the case of Fatal Push, have conditions to meet, Lightning Bolt's drawback is that it always deals 3 damage. We're playing against Gruul midrange in Modern, and we need to get rid of a Bloodbraid elf that's on the beatdown. Lightning Bolt can do this no problem. For Fatal Push to work, it would need to trigger Revolt. Though this can be done more commonly by cracking a fetch land, we can't always rely on this as a means to turn on our Fatal Push. Lightning Bolt is just more reliable in this scenario. So why is Lightning Bolt such a defining card for Red and, well, such a defining card for the game? Well, first off, Lightning Bolt being instant makes it best in class. Every other burn spell either costs more, is conditional, or is at sorcery speed for the same rate. 1 mana for 3 damage is the top end of what you're going to get. The next best burn spell in Red is maybe Chain Lightning, but it is sorcery speed, and should your opponent have red mana available, it can be thrown back. Lightning Bolt is the best in class for other reasons, too. When playing a control deck, one of the ways in which decks like Grixis or Jeskai control have an advantage over straight blue-white control is in the late game. Having 3 Lightning Bolts in hand toward the end of the game is far, far better than having 3 Swords to Plowshares or 3 Path to Exile. That's 9 damage in hand with potential to close the game all by itself. A lot of what makes Bolt so good is that, compared to other 1-mana interaction in the format, it's generally a mana-positive interaction. A card like Thoughtseize, which trades a mana and a card for one of an opponent's cards, is mana disadvantage. Lightning Bolt will often trade up so far in terms of tempo that it's worth more than the 1 card it costs to play. It can be worth a card for you, but take an opponent's entire 3rd turn. In that sense, it's like a time walk, and when it's played correctly, that's a really strong effect for just 1 mana. A card like Gazella, the Broken Blade, is unplayable in Modern because Lightning Bolt exists. Lightning Bolt is also a win condition in its own right. If we have access to 4 mana in Grixis control, we can play the sequence Lightning Bolt, Snapcaster Mage, Lightning Bolt. If we get to attack with our Snapcaster Mage when we untap, that's a solid 8 damage. That's basically half an opponent's life total, and that's from just 2 cards. In a control deck with access to this line of play, it's incredibly easy to turn the corner and go from being the defending player to being on the beatdown. With additional Lightning Bolts or other removal in hand, that Snapcaster Mage can continue to push through damage as well. Lightning Bolt allows us to play reactively and proactively. That's what makes it the best in class. While Lightning Bolt currently isn't legal in Standard and hasn't been since M11, Wizards of the Coast haven't said that they will never do it, but they have said that it's highly unlikely. So what motivates the absence of Lightning Bolt in Standard? Well, Bolt does the reverse of what a card like Elvish Mystic does. Elvish Mystic restricts how good 3-drops can be, and also narrows the range of playable 2-drops. If decks are skipping from 1 to 3 mana, 2-drops suddenly become less attractive. On the other hand, Lightning Bolt does the opposite. It makes creatures that cost 2, 3, or even 4 mana that would die to a Lightning Bolt simply unplayable. Let's look back to when Lightning Bolt was Standard legal during Lorwyn Standard. At that time, the aggro beatdown decks were overwhelmingly token-based. Decks couldn't afford to run single creatures when they could instead cast a card like Lingering Souls to put multiple bodies into play. The effects of Lightning Bolt were again seen during the time it was legal in M11 Standard. Decks either opted to go big or they played Squadron Hawk, which replaced itself many times over. In short, Lightning Bolt bottlenecks design a lot. It's a very powerful card. When playing with a card like Lightning Bolt, it's important to understand the balance between its many applications. Put simply, when your removal hits creatures and also hits face, how do you know where to send it? The answer can be broken down into these general tips. Remove creatures first. Address planeswalkers before they become problematic. Exchange cardboard before going upstairs. So first off, Bolt should go after creatures, generally speaking, as just burning the opponent's life total without a way to win is the equivalent of discarding cards for no real effect. Plus, all the while, you'll have creatures hitting you that otherwise wouldn't be if you'd removed them instead. We've covered this before, but having 1 life and having 100 life is more or less the same amount of being alive. If someone is at 14, getting them down to 8 with 2 bolts is not very impactful. In decks that play Bolt as part of their removal suite, it's generally accepted that we want to create good mana exchanges and remove problematic permanents like planeswalkers, as opposed to going upstairs and shooting the player directly. Generally, exchanging cardboard is better than going after their life total until you've more or less won the game. A Lightning Bolt is worth more when it can target a player on 6 or less life, for instance, than a player on 7 or more. The exception to these general guidelines is when you're playing Burn. Burn does not operate on the same angle as an aggro or control deck that plays Lightning Bolt. If anything, Burn is more akin to a 7-card combo deck. Instead of a 2-card combo, we're casting 7 spells that deal 3 damage each. That's 21. Of course, it's not as simple as that, but you get the drift. When playing with a card like Lightning Bolt, there are some other things we need to be aware of. Risk assessment, proactive versus reactive, and sequencing. Let's start with risk assessment. A lot of choices with Bolt come down to how replaceable that effect is. How many removal spells do you have in your hand? How about in your deck? Timing is super important here. It sounds basic, but consider playing against humans in Modern. This can often come down to figuring out if you want to go after the turn 1 Noble Hierarch or the turn 2 Mantis Rider. Both can be threatening in different ways, and whether you remove one or wait for the other will largely depend on what's available in your hand at the time. Ideally, your removal will always aim to kill the biggest thing it can to gain the biggest mana advantage. We should consider, though, that any mana advantage is generally still fine, and that getting rid of the mana generation, or the Thalia Guardian of Thraben, which makes your spells less efficient, is still a great move, especially if we have the mana to do so. This leads me nicely into point 2. When playing a proactive deck, there's an opportunity cost to being reactive on an opponent's turn. If we're playing blue-white control and we want to use Cryptic Command to counter a spell, it costs us, at minimum, holding up 4 mana. Even if we don't cast the Cryptic Command, we still took the turn to prepare to do so. If our opponent doesn't do anything, we effectively hold up and waste 4 mana, assuming that's the only option available to us. We could also have left that mana open instead of playing a Baneslayer Angel or Lyra Dawnbringer, which is a big tempo loss too. The same is true when it comes to of burn. Holding up one land for a lightning bolt is trivial, but as soon as you start to consider a card like Lightning Strike, holding up 2 mana can feel like a lot more, especially when the decks that want to play Lightning Bolt generally don't aim to have more than 4 to 5 lands in play as they proceed towards winning the game. When playing with Lightning Bolt, the most common sequencing you'll encounter is deciding what to do when you have another 1-drop option to play. In a lot of cases, when you're not wanting to shoot a mana dork, you are happy to play a different 1-drop, like Monastery Swiftspear. On the other hand, if Lightning Bolt is your only 1-drop, what's the plan? Say our opening hand is Mountain, Sun-Baked Canyon, Eidolon of the Great Revel, Skull Crack, Boros Charm, and Lightning Bolt. It's unwise to just fire off a Lightning Bolt willy-nilly. Bolt is our only interactive spell, and so we should be very careful about how we use it. If our opponent is on Modern Humans, an unanswered Champion of the Parish can really punish us here. Holding a Bolt until later isn't the worst when looking at this hand. We can still play a 2-drop followed by a 2-drop and a 1-drop on turn 3. We don't lose anything mana-wise by sequencing this way, while still being flexible on turn 1. In Modern, too, playing an early Lightning Bolt will also grow the Tarmogoyf, which is not something you generally want to do unless you're playing one yourself. In short, don't cast it until you have to. Sometimes, though, we'll feel we have to cast it on our turn. What do these scenarios look like? When they're low on mana or counter magic, when they're a deck with pump spells or protection, or just to push damage through. In the first instance, if an opponent is tapped low with either 1 or 0 lands open, they could have counter magic available going back into their turn. If this is the case, we would want to fire off the bolt before they get to untap. In the second, we could be playing against a deck like Infect. Against a deck with protection spells or pump spells, we might want to remove the creature at sorcery speed, on the chance that they may have it. Even if they do use it, you're still netting an advantage, as the cost to protect their creature was a loss in tempo. They can do less damage over the next several turns. The final scenario is probably the most common, applying pressure. By spending the bolt to kill a creature, our 2/2 could get in and be doing more than the bolt ever could. This comes up in builds that focus less on burn and more on creatures, as it helps with paving the way. Removing a 3/3 lets all of our 2/2s attack. So we've covered playing with Bolt. What about playing against it? Generally, the best way to beat Bolt is to play into it. You lose more tempo not playing cards than by playing into it. The only way out is through. There are ways to mitigate the damage a Bolt can do, though. The first is to try baiting out removal by playing your worst creatures first. This is the same approach as in playing limited against removal-heavy decks. You'll want to exhaust their removal so you can deploy the real threat. Baiting out removal when we're playing Infect by playing creatures out instead of activating our Inkmoth Nexus can be the difference between winning and losing a game. The second thing to keep in mind is the idea that you want to get out of the 1-for-1 exchange as soon as possible. You want to have it so that the opponent deploying a lightning bolt doesn't just erase your full turn. The easiest way to do this is to deploy multiple threats alongside each other. If you think the opponent has a removal-heavy deck but is low on mana, deploy multiple threats. We've covered this idea in the Thoughtseize episode, the idea of holding Thoughtseize to use in the same turn as a threat you wanted to resolve. We can't talk about Lightning Bolt without covering Burn in the wider context. What's the difference between Burn and red deck wins? Well, it's red, but it's not Burn. Where burn decks are primarily made up of instant and sorceries to deal damage, red deck wins differs in that it's more creature-based. An easy way to figure out whether a deck is closer to red deck wins is to ask yourself, how much am I lava spiking versus attacking with Get to Lava Runner? If it's the latter, you're not quite a burn deck. How much are creatures a part of burn? The astute among you will point out that burn decks do run creatures. Between Goblin Guide, Monastery Swiftspear, and Eidolon of the Great Revel, you're looking at a base 12 creatures that make up burn, with burn decks on average running 12 to 16 creatures. For these creatures to be worth a card in burn, they need to deal at least 3 points of damage, which is the basic rate for burn spells to be efficient. So for example, if a Goblin Guide dies on turn 3 after dealing 4 damage over the first 2 turns, that's 1 mana for 4 damage, which is a pretty good rate. Our opponent in this scenario has also traded a removal spell or creature for it. That's an even better rate. The same is true for our Eidolon. If we've managed to get a trigger or 2 and seen it get in for damage, we're happy. Generally, in burn decks, if that Swift Spear can't get in beyond a wall of roots or another blocker, then maybe we'll start to sling our burn at the face. Decks like Izzet Gift Storm don't main deck Lightning Bolt because they're all in on combo. If a card doesn't give mana or make stuff cheaper, it's not worth the slot. These decks can still sometimes board it in because it's good removal, but otherwise don't want it in the main deck. Most other fair red decks, Zoo, Burn, Jeskai Control, or Jund, all really love Bolt because it's flexible even though it's not intended to be a game-winning card. It's all about being reactive and proactive, as we've covered. Lightning Bolt is far from the only burn spell, and though Lightning Strike and Shock are perhaps the closest to it, either costing 1 more or doing 1 less damage, they are hugely different. The first copy of these spells in a game doesn't make a big difference early game, it's true. Shocking a Bird of Paradise or holding Lightning Strike on turn 2 instead of a Bolt, it's functionally the same interaction. With Lightning Bolt and Snapcaster Mage, we are able to produce 8 damage for 4 mana. Bolt Snap Bolt versus Shock Snap Shock is a difference of 2 damage. This only nets 6 damage for the same mana investment. We need an extra copy of Shock and an extra mana for the same net total damage. Furthermore, let's look at Tarmogoyf. This creature is likely to average as a 4/5 body most of the time. 2 shocks won't kill it, but 2 bolts do. 2 mana to kill it with 2 bolts is a lot less of a tempo loss for us. We're spending 2 mana and 2 cards on a 2-drop instead of 3 mana and 3 cards or 4 mana with 2 lightning strikes. Even with Snapcaster, this is incredibly inefficient. These other spells just don't scale like Lightning Bolt does. In evaluating the burn you want beyond Lightning Bolt, or in the case of Standard, instead of Lightning Bolt, you need to consider what you get for your mana investment. Bone Crusher Giant has cemented its place in the short lists of many decks because it's good against creature decks and far better than a spell like Magma Jet. Magma Jet seeks to dig for a second spell, but Bone Crusher Giant gives you that spell. It adds a 4/3 to your hand. That spell is also protected from effects like Thoughtseize, while it is exiled as an adventure. Lightning Bolt is an iconic Magic card. No, it's the iconic Magic card. It's elegant, simple, and at the same time, multifaceted and complex. Being able to understand the ethos behind how to play the card, how to play against it, and what makes it so strong can help you evolve your skill to the next level. It can also help you analyze other removal spells too. What makes Dismember good is what makes Bolt good. 1 mana to kill Gurmag Angler or Tarmogoyf with some life loss is a strong play. It fills a similar role, and your approach to playing it should be the same. Thanks for watching another session of Tolarian Tutor. Today's episode built on what we learned in the previous session on Mana Dorks. Today we covered why Lightning Bolt is good, what makes it format defining, how to play and sequence it, how to assess threats, what sets it apart from other burn spells. This is Tolarian Community College. I'm the professor. Our professional consultant as ever is my own tutor, Emma Handy. Kristen Gregory is our script supervisor, and Patrick Lickman, our editor. Thanks for those lightning bolts, Patrick. And remember, it's not about winning individual games of Magic. It's about getting better, win or lose.